My name is Emily Carter. I was a kindergarten teacher, living paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment, never imagining that one decision made by my grandparents would change my life forever. 6 weeks ago, I was grading papers, sipping stale coffee, and worrying about rent when the phone rang. That call shattered my reality. It told me my grandparents were gone. And soon after, another revelation came, a revelation that would rip apart whatever fragile threads still connected me to my family. When the lawyer spoke those words, "Emily, you are the sole heir to $26 million," I felt the world tilt. 26 million. The number echoed in my head like thunder. I should have felt lucky, but all I felt was fear. Because money more than anything else reveals true colors. And within hours, my family's colors turned darker than I had ever imagined. My grandparents had raised me more than my parents ever did. They taught me kindness mattered more than wealth, that love outlasted possessions. They clipped coupons, drove old cars, and laughed about simple things. To the outside world, they looked modest, maybe even ordinary. But inside, they carried values that were extraordinary. They built their fortune from nothing and still lived like every dollar mattered. And that fortune, all $26 million of it, was now mine. The moment this truth reached my parents, the mask of family cracked. My father, Robert, once a man who measured worth in promotions and property, began speaking to me not as a daughter, but as a possession. My mother, Claire, known more for her social circles than her care for me, suddenly draped her words in syrupy sweetness. And my younger brother, Ethan, restless, reckless, always searching for shortcuts, saw me not as his sister, but as his investor. They surrounded me with questions disguised as demands. They laughed off my shock, reminding me I was just a teacher, who could not possibly know what to do with that kind of money. Their tone shifted from patronizing to threatening so quickly that my stomach knotted with dread. It was in that moment I understood something my grandparents had warned me about long ago. Emily, money is a magnifier. It makes the greedy greedier, the selfish more selfish, and the kind more generous. It never changes people, it only shows you who they always were. I had thought their words were wise proverbs. Now I saw them as prophecy. Standing in that conference room, my hands trembling, I realized I was no longer only the poor teacher struggling to survive. I had suddenly become the keeper of a legacy, $26 million, and the values of the two people who truly loved me. And with that gift came enemies, wearing the faces of my family. The lawyer's voice faded into the background as my father slammed his fist on the table, demanding answers. My mother's voice grew shrill, already calculating her share. Ethan leaned back, smirking, imagining the business ventures he would fund. And me, I sat there, frozen, heart pounding, realizing that what was meant to be a blessing had just become a curse. This was only the beginning. Before I tell you the rest, I need to ask something. If you are listening right now, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if stories about family betrayal and standing your ground resonate with you, hit subscribe. This way you will not miss what happens when money tears loyalty apart. Because my story is not just about $26 million. It is about discovering who truly stands with you when the mask of family falls away. And in the next moments, you will see how quickly love can turn to greed, and how one woman learned to say no when everything was on the line. I grew up in a house where everything looked perfect from the outside. My father, Robert, wore expensive suits and worked 60-hour weeks. My mother, Claire, spent her time climbing social ladders, always dressed in designer clothes, always aiming for the right photo at the right party. To neighbors, we were a respectable, successful family. But inside our home, it was hollow. They gave me what I needed to survive: food, clothes, a roof, but not what I needed to live. Warmth, attention, guidance. When I was 5, weekends at home felt like empty space. My parents were too busy answering calls or planning events to notice me sitting at the kitchen table alone with crayons. Then my grandparents, Henry and Margaret, quietly stepped in. They invited me over just for Saturday, then Sunday, then whole summers. Before long, their house became more mine than my parents' mansion ever was. Their place was nothing like the cold perfection of my parents' world. It was a 4-bedroom home filled with laughter and the smell of cinnamon bread. Out back stretched 3 acres of garden where Grandpa Henry knelt in the dirt, teaching me how to plant zucchini and tomatoes. Patience grows crops, Emily, he used to say. And patience grows people too. I didn't understand at the time, but those words carved themselves into my bones. Grandma Margaret taught me skills that sound small, but shaped me more than any class ever could. She showed me how to sew a button-bake cookies from scratch and write thank you notes by hand. She listened to every word I said, no matter how childish, as though it mattered. They never missed a school, play a soccer game, or even a spelling bee. My parents often forgot the dates, but my grandparents always sat in the front row clapping louder than anyone else. Their love came with lessons. Despite their wealth, they lived simply. Grandpa drove the same pickup truck for 20 years. Grandma used coupons at the grocery store, smiling proudly when she saved a few cents. Money is just a tool, they told me. Use it wisely or it will use you. They repeated that sentence until I could recite it by heart. That philosophy clashed with my father's hunger for status. He saw his parents' frugality as an insult. He wanted luxury condos, fast promotions, and recognition. They offered him opportunities, but with conditions: work summers, learn humility, earn what you receive. He hated them for it. I, on the other hand, thrived under their guidance. They didn't hand me money, they gave me values. They told me I could choose passion over profit, so I did. When I said I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, they smiled. My father sneered. My childhood became a tale of two families under one roof, one cold and glittering, the other warm and modest. Guess which one shaped me? Looking back, I can see now that my parents' absence was never an accident. It was a choice. They invested in appearances, not people. I was an accessory in their lives, like a trophy they could place on a shelf when convenient. My grandparents treated me as a person. They made me feel seen. That difference became a fault line running through my life. At the time, I didn't question it. I only knew that I felt safe in their home, curled up under the quilt my grandmother stitched, falling asleep to the smell of my grandfather's wood polish on the furniture. But those moments built something inside me, an anchor that would hold firm years later when my parents tried to strip everything away. It's strange to admit, but the person I became was less the daughter of Robert and Claire and more the child of Henry and Margaret. They were my compass. And when they were suddenly gone, I lost not just family, but the very people who had given my life direction. That is why their decision to leave me everything was not an accident. It was intentional. It was their final act of love. Sometimes I think about that contrast, two versions of family living side by side. One obsessed with appearances, the other rooted in values. When the $26 million entered the picture, those two versions collided like storms meeting in the sky. The result, chaos and heartbreak. But before that storm, there was still peace. And in that peace, I had found my true home in my grandparents' embrace. And before I go deeper, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt closer to people outside your immediate family than to your own parents? If you have, share it in the comments below. Your stories matter, and maybe they will help someone else who feels alone know that they are not. Because that feeling, that divide between blood and love, is the very root of everything that followed. By the time I was old enough to understand what my grandparents had achieved, their story already felt like a legend in our town. They started with nothing but grit and a single truck in the late 1970s. Henry, my grandfather, drove deliveries across 3 states, while Margaret handled the paperwork from their garage. That was the seed that grew into Alexander Logistics, a company that would one day employ hundreds and generate millions. By the time I was born, the business was thriving. They had a fleet of 200 trucks, 5 warehouses, and contracts that made them a regional powerhouse. But here's the remarkable part: you would never know it by looking at them. Grandpa still wore his old flannel shirts. Grandma still clipped coupons for cereal and canned beans. When people asked why, she would smile and say, "Because money is a tool, not a crown." Their home reflected that same philosophy. Modest, practical, filled with things that mattered only because they were connected to memories. A rocking chair Henry built in his 20s still sat by the fireplace. The kitchen table was scratched from years of family dinners, but Grandma refused to replace it. A new one wouldn't know our stories, she told me once, running her hand across the faded wood. That simplicity was a deliberate choice. For them, wealth was not about showing off. It was about creating security, opportunities, and freedom. And it was this philosophy that placed them on a collision course with my father. Robert, their only son, grew up expecting wealth to flow into his hands like water. He wanted the company handed over to him, He wanted luxury cars, vacation homes, and the respect that came with both. But my grandparents insisted he work like every other employee. When he demanded a senior role, without qualifications, Henry refused. "Earn it," he told him. My father stormed out and never forgave them. That resentment defined our family. To my father, their refusal was betrayal. To them, his entitlement was disappointment. And caught between them was me, the granddaughter who absorbed every lesson they offered. I learned that value came not from titles, but from contribution. That true wealth wasn't measured in square footage, but in character. Those lessons shaped my own choices. When I declared I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, a career that paid little but filled my heart, my father nearly choked. But my grandparents were thrilled. They told me, "Emily, your work is noble. You are planting seeds that will grow far beyond you." They meant children's minds. But in truth, they were also planting something in me, the courage to choose meaning over money. On Sundays, while my parents attended charity galas, I sat in my grandparents' garden, learning how zucchini needed careful tending and patience. While my father talked about investments, my grandfather explained how honesty in business had kept employees loyal for decades. While my mother obsessed over social circles, my grandmother showed me how to bake cookies for the neighbors, because kindness makes communities. Even as a child, I saw the difference. My parents measured success in applause. My grandparents measured it in impact. And when they looked at me, they saw not someone to control, but someone to guide. I know now that their fortune was not just dollars. It was the culture they created, the reputation they built, and the relationships they nurtured. Their employees adored them. Their neighbors trusted them. Their friends respected them. They left behind more than numbers on a balance sheet. They left behind a living testament to their values. That is why years later, when I sat in that lawyer's office, hearing their will, I realized they had not chosen me because I was their granddaughter. They had chosen me because I had lived their lessons, because I valued what they valued, because I had carried their legacy long before they gave me their fortune. But their decision would ignite a firestorm. My father saw their choice as his final humiliation. My mother saw it as her lost ticket to status, and my brother saw it as capital for schemes. $26 million was the number that stripped away every disguise my family had ever worn. Still before the storm broke, I had those years of peace. Years when my grandparents taught me that wealth is silent strength, not loud pride. That lesson would soon be tested, and I would have to decide if I could live up to it when everyone around me demanded I betray it. Hard to say. The cracks in my family were always there, but as I grew older, they became impossible to ignore. My father's resentment toward his parents was not subtle. Every holiday gathering was laced with tension. He would show up in a tailored suit, lean back in his chair, and make comments about how outdated their lifestyle seemed. "You could buy a mansion, Dad," he once sneered at my grandfather. "Why waste your time clipping coupons?" My grandfather didn't flinch. He simply replied, "Because I earned every dollar, and I choose to spend it with care." That single sentence infuriated my father more than any insult could. For me, the difference between my parents and my grandparents was like living in two separate worlds. In my parents' house, success meant image. My mother decorated every room like a showroom. The dining table sparkled, but rarely hosted genuine conversation. Dinners were brief, dominated by phone calls and social gossip. I often ate in silence, staring at my plate. In my grandparents' home, dinner meant warmth. We passed around steaming bowls of stew, shared stories, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. My grandmother believed food was love, and her kitchen was always open. My father dismissed it as small living. I saw it as life itself. The real breaking point between my father and my grandparents came when he demanded a senior role at Alexander Logistics. He was in his 30s then, with no experience beyond his corporate jobs. "I'm your son," he argued. "It's my right to run this company." My grandfather's answer was firm. "You can apply for a position like anyone else. Earn your place. If you prove yourself, promotions will follow." My father stormed out, slammed the door, and from that day on, the relationship never healed. That conflict shaped how my parents treated me. My father projected his disappointment onto my choices. When I decided to pursue teaching, he called it a waste. "You're throwing away your future for a salary barely above minimum wage," he scoffed. My mother joined in, shaking her head and saying, "At least marry someone ambitious. You need stability, Emily." Their words cut deep, but they never pierced the shield my grandparents had built inside me. When I told Henry and Margaret my decision, their faces lit up. My grandfather said, "You're shaping lives, Emily. That matters more than titles." My grandmother hugged me tight and whispered, "We are proud of you." That affirmation meant more to me than any paycheck could. Still, the contrast between the two halves of my family caused endless tension. My mother viewed my closeness with my grandparents as betrayal. She accused me of favoring them, of choosing their side in every argument. The truth, I did choose them not out of disloyalty, but because they chose me first. They showed up when my parents didn't. They gave me guidance when my parents were absent. Looking back now, I realize my father's anger wasn't just about the company. It was about control. He couldn't control his parents, and he couldn't control me. He measured worth in possessions while my grandparents measured it in principles. That difference created a canyon between us. And yet, despite their estrangement from him, my grandparents never spoke with hatred. They said, "We love your father, but we cannot reward choices that go against our values." They hoped he might one day see money differently. He never did. Instead, his bitterness grew. He started to look at me with suspicion, as though my closeness with them was theft in itself. Those years taught me that family bonds are not invincible. They can crack under the weight of greed and pride. My father saw inheritance as entitlement. My grandparents saw it as responsibility, and I, caught in between, became the reflection of everything my parents resented. When Henry and Margaret eventually decided to leave everything to me, it was not just about love. It was a statement, a line in the sand. They entrusted me because I valued what they valued. But that decision would provoke an explosion my grandparents predicted, but I never imagined. At the time, I only knew one thing: love and values had shaped me more than wealth ever could. I was a teacher, yes, but I was also the granddaughter of two people who built an empire with patience and principle. And when the storm finally hit, those lessons became the only armor I had left. Tux. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet and ordinary, when my phone rang and shattered everything. I had been sitting at my small kitchen table grading finger paint projects from my kindergarten class. The call came from an unknown number. When I answered, a calm but heavy voice on the other end said, "Miss Carter, I'm sorry to inform you. Your grandparents were in an accident." The words didn't register at first. Accident, hospital, gone. I froze, pen slipping from my hand. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. The officer explained a drunk driver had run a red light and hit them at full speed. They died instantly. He said they didn't suffer, but his assurance meant nothing. My grandparents, the only people who ever truly made me feel like home existed, were gone. The next days blurred together. The funeral was held 3 days later. My parents immediately seized control of the arrangements, but even then their focus wasn't grief, it was appearances. I watched my father argue with the funeral director about flower costs. My mother snapped at the caterers insisting on the right wine. My brother Ethan stood off to the side, scrolling on his phone, as though he couldn't wait to leave. My Aunt Linda cried dramatically for the cameras, then stopped the moment people stopped watching. Uncle Paul, as always, hovered silently in her shadow. None of them had visited my grandparents in years. They arrived at the funeral draped in black faces, carefully arranged for sympathy, but I saw the truth. Their grief was shallow. They were playing parts. I, on the other hand, could barely stand. When the casket was lowered into the ground, I felt like the earth swallowed not just 2 lives, but every piece of safety I had ever known. After the funeral, I drove to my apartment. I couldn't even bring myself to step inside my grandparents' house. The thought of it standing empty, their chairs unoccupied, their kitchen cold, was unbearable. For days I wandered in silence. My classroom went unattended. I took bereavement leave. I tried to distract myself with books and chores, but nothing worked. Their absence was everywhere. And then came the phone call that would change everything again. 2 weeks after the funeral, my grandparents' attorney, Mr. Goldstein, requested a meeting. "We need you and your immediate family to come in for the reading of the will," he said. My stomach sank. I knew there would be paperwork legalities, but I never imagined what awaited. The morning of the meeting, the sky was gray, heavy with drizzle. I arrived early, wearing the black dress my grandmother once said made me look grown up. The attorney's office was in a converted Victorian home with dark wood paneling and shelves of heavy books. Mr. Goldstein greeted me with warm eyes and genuine sorrow. "Your grandparents were extraordinary people," he said softly. His words nearly broke me again. Then the door burst open. My father entered first, checking his expensive watch. My mother swept in behind him, her designer bag clutched like armor. Ethan followed, sunglasses still on indoors. My aunt's voice carried as she complained on her phone, and my uncle trailed after, her silent as always. They looked like a small army marching to battle. We gathered around a long oak table. My father sat at the end, posturing like he was already in control. I stayed near the attorney, searching for strength. The air was thick with tension. As we waited for the proceedings, I felt my heart race. I didn't know why, but something told me this wasn't going to be ordinary. My grandparents had never done anything without purpose. Whatever was in that will, it would not be simple. I stared at the polished wood table, hearing only the pounding of my own pulse. My parents whispered to each other, smirking. Ethan tapped his fingers impatiently. My aunt adjusted her pearls, ready for her performance. They all expected the same thing, wealth divided neatly among them, as though it were their birthright. But deep inside, a flicker of memory returned. My grandmother's voice. Money reveals true colors. I had no idea how true those words would become in just a few minutes. And so I sat bracing myself as Mr. Goldstein opened the leather portfolio. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read. The attorney's voice filled the conference room, measured and steady, as though he had done this 1,000 times. At first, it was only formalities, revoking older versions of the will, naming him executor, clarifying legal terms. My family shifted impatiently, glancing at each other, certain their fortune was moments away. My father leaned back, arms folded with a smug look, as if the outcome was already written in his favor. My mother adjusted her bracelet, a gleam in her eyes. Ethan slouched, bored, but expectant. My aunt dabbed her eyes theatrically with a tissue. Then the words came. We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including all assets, investments, and property, to our beloved granddaughter, Emily Carter. The room fell into absolute silence. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Did I hear correctly? The entire estate, $26 million. For me. The attorney continued, calmly reading details like he was reciting grocery lists. $8 million in cash assets, $12 million in investments, $5 million in real estate, $1 million in shares of the company. All of it. To me. Then like a thunderclap. We specifically and intentionally make no provision for our son Robert, our daughter-in-law, Claire, our grandson, Ethan, or our relatives, Linda and Paul. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Suddenly my father slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. This is outrageous, he shouted. His face turned red as he snatched the document from Mr. Goldstein's hands, scanning it furiously. They must have been manipulated. They must have been confused. This is insane. My mother jumped in, her voice sharp and condescending. $26 million to a kindergarten teacher. She doesn't know the first thing about managing money. She'll ruin it. Ethan leaned forward, his sunglasses slipping down his nose. What about me? I'm family too. I need capital for my business. You can't just leave me out. My aunt's face flushed as she pointed at me. What did you do, Emily? How did you trick them into this? Did you play the innocent act until they fell for it? Their accusations swirled like a storm around me. My hands shook in my lap. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. I couldn't form words. All I could think was they really did it. My grandparents left it all to me. The people who raised me, who loved me, who stood by me, they had made their choice. And it wasn't the choice my family expected. Please take your seats, Mr. Goldstein said firmly, reclaiming the papers from my father. There is more. He pressed a button on a remote. A large screen on the wall lit up. And there they were, my grandparents. Alive again for just a moment, sitting side by side on their sofa. My throat tightened at the sight. Grandpa spoke first. If you are watching this, it means we have passed on. We want to explain our decision directly. Grandma continued, her voice calm but firm. Robert, Linda, we love you as our children, but we are disappointed in the values you have chosen. For decades, you treated us as resources rather than family. You missed birthdays, holidays, and moments that mattered. You came to us when you needed money, not when you wanted to spend time. I felt my eyes welling up. Grandpa leaned forward. Emily has never asked us for a cent. She visits because she loves us. She chose a career helping children even though it doesn't pay much because it fills her purpose. She has lived the values we tried to pass down. My grandmother nodded. We trust Emily to use what we have built wisely to honor our legacy, not squander it. That is why we leave everything to her. The video ended. Silence followed, but only for a second. My father exploded. Garbage. They were senile. We'll contest this, Will. Mr. Goldstein stayed calm. They anticipated that, Robert. They underwent cognitive evaluations signed by multiple independent doctors. The will is airtight. Contesting it will be expensive and nearly impossible. My mother suddenly shifted tones, her voice sickly sweet. Emily, darling, you know this isn't right. That money belongs to the family. You'll share it with us, won't you? Ethan sneered. Yes, sis, don't be selfish, hand it over. I sat frozen, every eye burning into me. My stomach twisted. My grandparents had trusted me with everything, and my family already wanted to tear it apart. Mr. Goldstein leaned toward me, his voice low but steady. You don't have to decide anything today. Take your time. We'll handle the estate for now. He slipped an envelope into my hands. Documents, keys, contacts. Call me when you're ready. Around me the shouting resumed. Threats of lawsuits. Demands for division. My father's voice cut through the chaos as he pointed at me with fury. This discussion isn't over. Come to our house tonight, 6 o'clock. We'll settle this as a family. I nodded numbly, clutching the envelope. In that moment, I realized something chilling. Inheritance was not a blessing. It was a battlefield. And the people standing across from me were not just family anymore, they were enemies. The drive back to my apartment after that meeting felt like drifting through fog. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was stuck on the image of my grandparents on that screen. Their voices, calm and steady, still echoed inside me. They had planned this. They knew the chaos it would cause. And yet they trusted me enough to bear it. That thought was both comforting and terrifying. I placed the envelope Mr. Goldstein had given me on the passenger seat. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained not just documents, but the weight of $26 million and every ounce of expectation that came with it. Part of me wanted to rip it open, right there, at a stoplight. Another part of me couldn't. To open it meant admitting this was real, that my life had been upended forever. By the time evening came, I found myself in my parents' driveway. Their house stood like a monument to excess 5,000 square feet of glass and granite, all designed to impress rather than welcome. I remembered being a child there, tiptoeing across polished floors, always afraid of breaking something too expensive to touch. It never felt like home. Tonight, it felt like a battlefield. When I stepped inside, the air was thick with tension. My father stood by the fireplace with a tumbler of scotch, his posture rigid. My mother perched elegantly in a designer chair, pretending calm. Ethan sprawled across the sofa, laptop open, already typing, like he was drafting contracts. Aunt Linda paced, muttering about renovations she would make to my grandparents' house, while Uncle Paul gazed silently out the window, as if wishing he could disappear. Sit down, Emily, my father commanded, his voice sharp with authority. I chose a chair near the door. A part of me already knew I might need a quick exit. Let's be reasonable, he began, slipping into his business negotiation voice. Your grandparents weren't thinking clearly. They meant for the family to benefit, not just you. I'll manage the estate. You'll receive 10%. That's more than generous, considering your limited needs. 10%. His words landed like a slap. My mother chimed in, sweetheart, that's still over $2 million. More than enough for a teacher. You can buy a real home, finally live properly. Ethan leaned forward. I need at least $5 million for my crypto platform. It's going to be massive. With your help, we'll all profit. His eyes glittered with the manic confidence of someone who had failed a dozen schemes already. I sat in silence, listening to their voices build into a chorus of demands. The estate wasn't a gift anymore. It was prey, and I was the barrier in their way. Finally, Aunt Linda added her claim. The house should go to us. We have 3 kids, and that neighborhood has better schools. It makes sense. I nearly laughed. Her children had barely sent birthday cards, never visited my grandparents once in that house. And now she wanted to tear down walls she had never walked past. When demands didn't move me, they shifted tactics. My mother's eyes glistened with fake tears. After all we've done for you, Emily, private school, summer camps, we gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. Where's your loyalty? I wanted to scream. Loyalty. They hadn't attended a single school play, hadn't sat with me through one night of homework, hadn't cared to know who I was beyond what they could show off. Then my father's tone hardened. We're not asking. You either sign the transfer documents or we contest the will. We'll drag every detail into court, every visit, every word you ever said to them. It'll get ugly. For a moment, fear rose in my chest. Then a memory flickered. My grandfather kneeling beside me in the garden when I was 8, saying, "No one can take your dignity unless you hand it over. Stand firm in what's right." I took a breath. My voice shook at first, but I managed to say, "No, I won't sign." The room erupted. My mother's face twisted, spitting accusations of ingratitude. Ethan cursed under his breath. Aunt Linda wailed about her children's future. My father slammed his glass so hard it cracked, then stalked toward me, finger jabbing the air. "Then you're out. Either you sign that paper and stay in this family, or you walk away disowned." His words rang like a gavel. Disowned. For a long second, no one breathed. My eyes scanned their faces, searching for even a flicker of love. Nothing. Just greed, anger, entitlement. And that's when it hit me my grandparents hadn't just given me money. They had given me clarity. They had known this moment would come when I would have to choose not between wealth and poverty, but between dignity and submission. I stood up slowly, clutching the envelope like a shield. "I'm not signing. I'll honor what they wanted. If that means I'm out, then I'm out." The silence that followed was louder than their shouts. And though my legs trembled, my heart felt strangely steady. This was the moment the battle lines were drawn, and there was no going back. The room seemed to freeze after I said the word no. For a brief second, all I heard was the tick of the mantel clock. Then it began. My mother shot up from her chair, her face twisting as if she had been personally betrayed. Ungrateful, she hissed, her voice sharp like broken glass. "We sacrificed everything for you private schools, braces, camps. And this is how you repay us, by hoarding what belongs to the family." Her words stung, but not because they were true, because I realized she believed them. She thought of me not as her daughter, but as an investment gone wrong. Ethan was next. He slapped his laptop shut, glaring at me with narrowed eyes. "You're pathetic," he snapped. "Do you really think you can handle $26 million? You're a teacher. You can barely handle a classroom. That money should go to someone who knows how to use it, like me." His arrogance dripped from every syllable, as if his failed crypto app had suddenly made him a financial genius. Aunt Linda gasped dramatically, clutching her pearls. "You've poisoned them," she accused. "You twisted their minds. I should have seen this coming, the way you always clung to them." Her eyes brimmed with staged tears, the kind meant to sway an audience. Only this time there was no one to perform for, except the very people she wanted to deceive. My father didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You think you're strong?" he said coldly, his finger pointing directly at me. "But you're weak. You have no idea the storm you've unleashed. Contesting the will destroy you. Every detail of your life with them will be dragged out in public. You'll crumble under the weight of it. Sign now, and it ends." For a heartbeat, fear surged through me. I pictured headlines, courtrooms, endless accusations. But then another memory surfaced, my grandmother's voice, soft but firm. "Emily, true love asks for nothing in return. Remember who shows up when you have nothing to give. That's how you know who deserves your loyalty." Looking around, I saw no love here, only entitlement. Their shouting overlapped a storm of greed. My mother listing her sacrifices, Ethan whining about business opportunities, my aunt wailing about her children's future, my father's threats simmering under it all. It was as if my family had transformed into strangers wearing familiar faces. And then the guilt-tripping began. My mother's tears shifted into honeyed words. "Sweetheart, think of us as a unit. Think of family. Family means sharing. We can't let outsiders see us divided." Her hands trembled theatrically, but her eyes were calculating. I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. Family. They hadn't acted like family when my grandparents were alive. They hadn't visited, hadn't cared, hadn't given. But now, with millions at stake, suddenly family was everything. I stayed silent, clutching the envelope tighter. Silence became my shield. The longer I refused to respond, the louder they became. Ethan demanded timelines for when I would hand over portions. Aunt Linda declared she had already picked out new wallpaper for my grandparents' house. My mother sighed dramatically, saying she would forgive me if I just signed. My father leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. "This is your last chance." But instead of fear, I felt a spark of something else resolve. For years I had let them talk over me, decide for me, diminish me, but not this time. I lifted my head and spoke, my voice steadier than I expected. "I won't sign. Not now, not ever. They trusted me, not you, and I will honor that." The silence that followed was electric. their faces twisted in disbelief as if the puppet they thought they controlled had suddenly cut its own strings. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's tears vanished, replaced by fury. Ethan muttered a curse under his breath. Aunt Linda's sobs turned to snarls. At that moment, I understood something crystal clear. This was not about family, this was about greed, and no amount of pleading or threatening could hide it. For the first time, I looked at them, not as my parents, my brother, my aunt, but as people who had chosen wealth over love. And I realized if I gave in now, I would lose more than money. I would lose myself. So I held my ground even as the storm raged louder, because deep down I knew this was only the beginning. Sakon. The shouting didn't end that night. It only escalated until the air itself seemed too heavy to breathe. My father slammed his glass against the mantel so hard that it cracked. He turned to me, his face flushed with rage. "You have two choices," he growled. "Sign the transfer documents and remain part of this family, or keep that inheritance and be cast out forever. There is no middle ground." The ultimatum hung in the room like smoke. For a long moment, no one moved. My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Emily, don't be foolish. You're not strong enough to stand alone. Family is everything. Without us, you have nothing." Her words dripped with manipulation, but her tone was sweet, almost maternal. It was a performance, a last attempt to wrap poison in sugar. Ethan scoffed, arms crossed. "What's there to think about? That money should be divided. I've already drafted the paperwork." He slid his laptop across the coffee table toward me. "All you need to do is sign, then we can all move on." I glanced down at the document. The language was broad, intentionally vague, essentially stripping me of every right my grandparents had left me. In return, I would get an unspecified percentage controlled entirely by my father. I felt my stomach churn. Aunt Linda broke in, her voice rising theatrically. "If you cared about this family at all, you'd think about my children. They deserve better schools, better futures. You don't even have kids you wouldn't understand. That house belongs with us." The words blurred together, each demand piling on top of the other until it felt like a wall closing in. Their voices grew sharper, louder, until it was no longer a conversation but an attack. Something inside me cracked open. My hands trembled, but my voice when it came was calm. "No." The room fell silent. The word hung between us, sharp and immovable. My father's eyes darkened. "What did you say?" I said no. I repeated, stronger this time. "I won't sign. I won't betray the trust they placed in me. They left this to me for a reason, and I intend to honor it." The explosion was immediate. My mother shrieked about betrayal. Ethan spat curses. Aunt Linda clutched her pearls and wailed as though the world had ended. My father stormed toward me, his finger pointed inches from my face. "You are no daughter of mine," he roared. "If you walk out of here without signing, you are disowned." For a heartbeat, fear clawed at my chest. Disowned. The word was heavy, final. But as I looked at their faces twisted with greed, devoid of love, I realized the truth. They had disowned me long ago when they chose money and image over me. I stood, my knees shaking but my voice steady. Then so be it. I reached for the envelope Mr. Goldstein had given me, clutching it tightly as though it were armor. Their faces blurred into one mass of rage and disbelief. My father's voice followed me, low and venomous. "You'll regret this. You think $26 million will save you. It will destroy you. Without us, you are nothing." But as I walked toward the door, something unexpected surged inside me, relief. For the first time, I wasn't bending. I wasn't silent. I was standing my ground. Still, fear lingered. This wasn't the end. My family didn't see this as defeat. They saw it as war. And I knew their next move wouldn't be begging, it would be retaliation. And before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. If you were given a fortune that turned your own family against you, what would you do? Would you share it out of fear, or would you hold your ground? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you would face that choice. Because that night, as I walked into the cold air, I realized something chilling: this battle was only beginning. And what came next would test not just my strength, but everything my grandparents had ever taught me about dignity, loyalty, and courage. I didn't even make it back to my apartment before the next blow landed. My father's threat wasn't empty. When I pulled into the driveway that night, I saw him already waiting at the curb in his black sedan. He leaned against the car, arms crossed, face carved from stone. "You think this is over?" he said quietly, too quietly. "You live in one of our properties. You wouldn't even qualify for that lease on a teacher's salary. Check your agreement, Emily. We own that building through one of our investment companies. Consider your lease terminated. My stomach dropped. You can't do that, I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. I just did, he replied coldly before slipping into his car and driving off into the night. Inside my apartment, panic set in. I pulled the lease from my file drawer. His words were true. The shell company listed as landlord was one I recognized from his endless bragging about smart real estate plays. I had thought he was helping me. In reality, he had been setting a trap all along. The next morning, my fears were confirmed. A notice slid under my door, 30 minutes to vacate. The locks would be changed that afternoon. 30 minutes to pack up my life. I moved in a daze, throwing clothes toiletries and important papers into bags. My grandmother's quilt, my grandfather's pocket watch, a handful of childhood photos. That was all I could manage. My father stood in the doorway the entire time, arms crossed, watching me like a guard. My mother waited downstairs, already on the phone with a realtor discussing the sale of my grandparents' house. Ethan leaned against the wall, smirking as he counted down the minutes like it was a game. You were never really part of this family anyway, my father muttered as I stuffed my last bag. Then, almost casually, he added, Your mother and I were going to divorce before she got pregnant with you. You were the obligation that kept us together. The cruelty of it hit harder than the eviction notice. I had always suspected I wasn't wanted, but to hear it said out loud left me staggering. My mother appeared in the doorway, her voice dripping disdain. We've wasted enough money on you. Tuition braces, camps, dance lessons, you were never worth the investment. Consider this the end of the line. Ethan smirked as I zipped the final bag. You'll regret this when the money runs out. You'll come crawling back and will remember how you chose cash over family. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Not here. Not now. At the front door, my mother delivered her final strike. You might have money now, but family is forever. You'll realize what you've thrown away. I turned, meeting her eyes. I'm not the one throwing family away. You are. The door slammed shut behind me, echoing like a final judgment. Standing by my car in the cold night air, I felt the reality crash down. I was effectively homeless. My apartment was gone. My parents had disowned me. My family had erased me. And all because I had refused to sign away the very thing my grandparents trusted me to protect. For the first time, I let myself break. I sat behind the wheel of my car, clutching the steering wheel as sobs tore through me. I cried for my grandparents, whose absence felt sharper than ever. I cried for the family I had always wished I had, but never truly did. And I cried for myself adrift, in a world that had turned upside down in just a matter of hours. When the tears finally slowed, I remembered the envelope still sitting on the passenger seat. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents, financial records, and keys. Attached was a rabbit-shaped keychain I recognized instantly, my grandmother's, the keys to their house. I sat frozen for a moment. Then, almost without realizing, I started the car. The drive to their home took 20 minutes. My hands shook on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light glowed softly, set on the timer my grandfather had rigged years ago. The house smelled exactly as I remembered, lemon verbena potpourri and wood polish. I flipped on the lights, half expecting to hear their voices. Silence pressed in on me. I made my way upstairs to the guest room I had always used. On the nightstand lay the novel I'd been reading during my last visit, the bookmark still tucked where I had left it. Fresh towels folded neatly on the dresser, placed there by my grandmother waiting for me. The thoughtfulness of it undid me. They had prepared for my next visit, never knowing they would be gone. I curled onto the bed, clutching the quilt, and cried until exhaustion pulled me under. When morning came, reality didn't vanish. But in that quiet, empty house, I felt the faintest trace of comfort. My family had cast me out, but my grandparents, through their home, their keys, their trust, had given me refuge. And it was there in that house that I realized the fight was far from over. The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, warming the guest room where I had slept. For a brief second, I could almost believe it was a normal Sunday at my grandparents' house, until silence reminded me they were gone. My eyes landed on the quilt, wrapped around me, the one my grandmother had stitched by hand. That quilt felt like armor, a reminder that even in death, she was holding me. Downstairs, the house was exactly as it had always been. My grandfather's favorite mug still sat by the sink. A deck of cards was neatly stacked on the coffee table. On the wall, the family photos told a story my parents had never cared to preserve: birthdays, graduations, simple dinners where smiles were genuine. I walked through the rooms, slowly feeling the weight of their absence, until I reached the study. The envelope Mr. Goldstein had given me included a note. "You'll find more answers in the house." My hands trembled as I turned the knob and stepped inside. The study smelled faintly of ink and wood polish. Shelves lined the walls, packed with books and binders. On the desk sat a row of leather-bound journals, each dated neatly in my grandmother's handwriting. My chest tightened as I opened one at random. Inside were entries, written with care, documenting not just daily events, but feelings. May 15th, one page read, "Robert visited today after 7 months of silence. He asked for $250,000 for a new investment. When we refused, he accused us of preferring Emily. It broke Harold's heart. But Emily has never once asked us for money. She visits to share meals, to bring groceries, to laugh with us." Robert left angry. Harold cried after he went upstairs. Tears blurred my vision as I flipped through page after page. The journals told a story I had always sensed, but never fully known. My parents and Ethan had come for money, always money. Demands, loans, never repaid arguments over their old-fashioned values. In contrast, my visits were described with warmth. My grandmother noticed every detail: the casserole I brought one Sunday, the way I helped with new phones, the evenings we sat on the porch. My heart ached. They had defended me when I wasn't there to hear it. They had seen me when my own parents hadn't. A sound behind me made me jump. At the doorway stood Carlos, the estate's longtime caretaker. His salt and pepper hair framed kind eyes, and in his hands he held a folder. "Miss Emily," he said softly, "your grandparents asked me to look after things if anything happened." I nodded, unable to speak. He stepped inside, setting the folder on the desk. "They updated the security system last year. Mr. Henry didn't trust the old one your father installed. He said it had too many blind spots. I have footage." My pulse quickened. "Footage of what?" Carlos hesitated. "After the funeral. Your father, your mother, and Ethan came here. They went through drawers, jewelry boxes, electronics. They took things. I recorded it all." Rage surged through me. Even on the day of the funeral, when my grandparents' bodies were barely in the ground, my family had come to plunder. Carlos placed a flash drive on top of the journals. "They knew this might happen. They wanted you to be protected. Everything is documented." As if summoned by fate, another knock echoed from the back door. Carlos went to answer, and moments later, a woman stepped inside. Dorothy Reynolds, my grandparents' housekeeper of 20 years. She hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You look just like Margaret when she was young," she said. "She loved you so much." She carried with her a small box. Inside were letters, decades of correspondence between my father and my grandparents. Each one was filled with requests for money, veiled threats, accusations. My grandmother had kept them all. Piece by piece, the evidence was piling up. Not just proof of my family's greed, but a map of my grandparents' foresight. They had prepared for this war, even if I hadn't. As I sat at the desk, surrounded by journals, letters, and security footage, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time since their deaths, I didn't feel entirely alone. My grandparents had left me more than money. They had left me weapons, the truth carefully documented. I closed the journal gently, running my fingers over my grandmother's handwriting. "Thank you," I whispered. Because in that moment, I understood the fight wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about defending their legacy, and I would not let it be stolen. By the next morning, I realized the house was no longer silent. It was filling slowly, steadily with people who had truly loved my grandparents, people I hadn't even expected to see. Each knock at the door was another reminder that Henry and Margaret Carter had built something far greater than wealth. They had built loyalty. The first to arrive was Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' longtime business partner. She carried a leather briefcase and the kind of calm authority that comes from decades of running a company with integrity. She shook my hand firmly. "Emily, I promised your grandparents I'd help guide you through the company when the time came. They trusted you with Alexander Logistics, and I will make sure you're not alone in learning how it works." Next came George Patel, their financial advisor for over 20 years. He laid thick folders on the dining room table, balance sheets, portfolios, meticulously prepared summaries. "They anticipated resistance from your family," he explained. "They wanted you fully briefed. Every account, every asset, Every liability is documented. Nothing can be twisted against you. Then came Dorothy again, bustling in with a casserole dish and her no-nonsense warmth. Food first battles after she declared setting plates on the counter. Her presence alone felt like armor around my heart. Soon others arrived. Sarah Johnson, the neighbor who had known my grandparents for 30 years, bringing stories and laughter between her tears. Carlos remained close quietly, ensuring the house was secure. It wasn't long before the dining room table was covered in more than food. It was covered in proof. Letters, bank statements, journals, even USB drives filled with video clips. One clip made my hands tremble, footage of my father and Ethan rifling through jewelry drawers after the funeral, stuffing items into their pockets. Another showed my mother slipping heirloom bracelets into her handbag while whispering, "She'll never appreciate these." Watching it was like having my worst suspicions carved into stone. Rosa looked at me steadily. "They built this company on honesty, Emily. They knew their son couldn't carry that torch. That's why they chose you. Not for your business experience, but for your values. We'll help you with the rest." George opened another binder. "Your grandparents set aside a separate trust, a small cottage outside of town purchased in your name. They suspected Robert might try to force you out of your apartment. They wanted you to have a safe place." Relief coursed through me. Even in death, they had anticipated every cruelty my parents might use. As we went through more files, Dorothy gasped softly. From the bottom of a drawer in the study, she pulled out a hidden envelope marked for Emily. Inside was a letter written in my grandmother's graceful script. "Dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then we are gone. We know your father will fight and we know it will hurt. But remember, this money reveals true colors, and you will see who truly stands with you. You are not alone. We've left you not just wealth, but friends who believe in you. Trust them. Trust yourself. We love you always." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I read them aloud, and the room grew still. Everyone there, Rosa, George, Dorothy, Carlos, Sarah, nodded silently. It was as if they too had been entrusted with her words. The weight of grief lifted slightly. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something other than fear. I felt strength. I wasn't fighting alone. My grandparents had left behind an army, not of lawyers and accountants alone, but of people who cared about them, and by extension about me. Late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. A new message from Ethan. "Enjoying the big, empty house. Tomorrow at 10, we're all coming over to collect what's ours. Better not try to stop us or it'll get ugly." I showed the message to Mr. Goldstein, who had returned by then. His jaw tightened. "Threats and potential breaking and entering," he muttered. Then he looked at me with a firmness that almost felt like my grandfather's. "Emily, this is exactly what your grandparents prepared for. Tomorrow, we don't wait for them to ambush you. We face them together." That night, as the house grew quiet again, I sat at the desk surrounded by journals and letters. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. My grandparents hadn't left me adrift. They had left me a roadmap, allies, and the truth. And when my so-called family came storming through those doors tomorrow, they would finally see the one thing they had never expected: that I was not alone. I woke before dawn the next morning, my chest tight with anticipation. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's message flashing in my mind like a warning siren. "Tomorrow at 10, we're coming. Better not try to stop us or it'll get ugly." By 7 o'clock, the house was already stirring with movement. Dorothy bustled in, carrying groceries, filling the kitchen with the smell of bacon and coffee. "If we're facing a storm, we face it on a full stomach," she declared, setting plates on the counter as though she had done it 1,000 times before. Carlos stationed himself near the front door, his posture calm but watchful. Rosa Martinez arrived with her laptop, spreading documents across the dining table like a general preparing for battle. George Patel carried in another binder, this one thicker than the rest, filled with notarized statements and certified financial records. At 8:30, Mr. Goldstein returned his briefcase heavier than ever. He handed me a folder of legal documents. "These are restraining orders ready to file." And here he added, passing me another stack, are cease and desist letters addressing the threats Ethan made. "We won't just defend, you'll be proactive." By 9, the house no longer felt empty. It felt like a fortress. Friends, advisors, neighbors, all people my grandparents had trusted filled the rooms. Their presence steadied me. For once, I didn't feel like a frightened teacher trapped in a nightmare. I felt like an heir not to wealth, but to a legacy of strength. At 9:45, the first cars pulled into the long driveway. My father's black sedan gleaming even under the cloudy sky. My mother's white SUV polished like her image. Aunt Linda's impractical red convertible with Uncle Paul silent beside her. Finally, Ethan's sports car blasting music as if to announce his arrival. Their early Mr. Goldstein observed, adjusting his glasses, trying to catch us unprepared. The pounding on the front door began almost immediately. Emily, my father, barked from outside. "Open up. This is family business." Carlos glanced at me. I nodded. He opened the door slowly. My father stepped inside first, shoulders squared, eyes sharp with entitlement. The others filed in behind him, clustering together like a pack. And then they froze. Because standing in the living room facing them wasn't just me, it was a wall of support. Rosa at the table with documents, George flipping open a binder, Dorothy calmly pouring coffee, Mr. Goldstein by my side. Even Sarah Johnson, the neighbor, sat nearby with folded hands, ready to speak if needed. My mother's face twisted. "What is this? You brought outsiders into a private matter." Before I could answer, the front door opened again. 3 more people entered. Judge Robert Henderson, tall and imposing, his presence commanding silence. Beside him, Police Chief Maria Williams, her uniform crisp. And finally, Thomas Jang, my grandparents' longtime financial advisor. My father's jaw clenched. He recognized them all. Especially Judge Henderson, the same judge who had once ruled against him in a business dispute years earlier. Robert the judge said evenly, "I'm here at the request of Henry and Margaret Carter. They asked me to serve as a witness in the event of disputes regarding their estate." Chief Williams spoke next, her tone calm, but edged with steel. "I'm here as a friend of the Carter family. Of course, if any crime is committed on this property, my role becomes official." The implied warning made Ethan glance nervously at the floor. For once, my family had no words. They had come expecting to corner me, to intimidate me into surrender. Instead, they walked into a room where every ally my grandparents had trusted now stood united against them. I stepped forward, my voice steady, though my hands trembled at my sides. "I know why you're here. You think you're entitled to what my grandparents built, but they made their decision clear. And today you'll finally understand why." My father sneered. "You think this little performance changes anything? They were manipulated. We're here to correct an injustice." But even as he spoke, Thomas Jang opened his briefcase and laid out documents. Rosa booted up her laptop. George tapped the binders stacked in front of him. One by one, the people who had truly known my grandparents prepared to speak. And I realized something powerful. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was theirs too. Because Henry and Margaret hadn't just left me money. They had left me their community, their chosen family. And before I show you how that confrontation unfolded, let me ask you this. Do you believe blood alone makes family? Or is family the people who stand with you when everything is on the line? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know. Because in the next hour, my family would face a truth they could no longer deny. And it would break everything they thought they had power over. The living room felt like a courtroom. My relatives stood clustered near the door, their confidence faltering as they realized the odds were not in their favor. On the other side, my grandparents' allies sat poised like witnesses ready to testify. The air crackled with tension. My father tried to recover first. He straightened his shoulders, forced a smile, and said, "Judge Henderson, what a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here." His voice carried a false warmth, but his eyes betrayed unease. The judge's expression didn't soften. "I'm here because Henry and Margaret asked me to be. They wanted impartial eyes on any disputes. And Robert, from what I've seen so far, their concerns were well-founded." My mother scoffed, folding her arms. "This is ridiculous. We're here to collect family heirlooms that belong to us. Why are strangers interfering?" Chief Williams stepped forward. "I'm here as a friend. But remember, if anyone tries to remove property without legal authority, it becomes theft. And then I act as law enforcement." The warning was clear. Ethan shifted uneasily, muttering under his breath. Then Thomas Jang, the financial advisor, spoke. "Actually, Robert, I have documentation of every attempt you've made to access your parents' assets in the past 20 years. The forged check in 2018, the unauthorized transfer attempt in 2016, even the petition to declare Margaret incompetent last year when she refused to fund Ethan's failed cryptocurrency venture." Gasps filled the room. My father's face flushed crimson. "That is taken out of context," he barked. Rosa Martinez stepped forward with her tablet. And I have records of the $200,000 company loan you never repaid in 2012 for your Aspen vacation home. Your parents chose not to pursue it, though they could have. My Aunt Linda, her cheeks flaming, spun toward me. You did this. You poisoned them against us. You manipulated them. Judge Henderson cleared his throat, silencing her. I reviewed Elizabeth Carter's journals myself. There was no manipulation. Every entry is detailed, consistent, and damning. Their decision was entirely their own. For the first time, my family looked rattled. My mother tried to regain control. This is all very theatrical, but it changes nothing. We'll contest the will, and when we do, we'll win. Mr. Goldstein stepped forward calmly. Then you should see these. He handed each family member a thick envelope. Inside, you'll find banking records, emails, and video evidence of your interactions with Henry and Margaret. If you contest the will, this will become public record. Uncle Paul opened his envelope. His face drained of color as he scanned the contents. He tugged Linda's sleeve. We should go, he whispered. This is not a fight we can win. But Linda shoved him off. Coward, she hissed, though her hands trembled as she clutched the folder. My father fell silent as he flipped through his own envelope. Inside were transcripts of cruel comments he had made about his parents recorded by them in their video journals. The evidence was irrefutable. Chief Williams added, and let me remind you, this property is now under 24-hour surveillance. Any attempt to remove items will be considered theft. Carlos has already provided backup files to law enforcement. Carlos nodded from his post near the door. Everything is recorded, inside and out. Finally, I stepped forward. My voice no longer shook. These, I said, handing papers to Ethan, are cease and desist orders for the threats you've made. These, I continued, passing documents to my father, are notices demanding the return of items stolen after the funeral. And these, I said, looking straight at my mother, are the terms under which I'll consider keeping contact with you. They include respect for my grandparents' wishes and an end to every attempt to contest the will. Silence fell. My family stared at me, their power stripped away by the mountain of evidence against them. This isn't over, my father muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Judge Henderson shook his head. Actually, Robert, it is. Your parents were meticulous. Any judge would uphold their will. One by one, my relatives retreated, their anger and bravado collapsing under the weight of truth. As they shuffled out, Ethan glared at me. This isn't the end, he spat. Perhaps not, I replied, my voice steady. But it's the end of you using this family as your piggy bank. They saw who you were, and so do I. The door closed behind them. The tension broke like a dam. Dorothy immediately poured fresh coffee, her voice soothing, as though to wash the room clean. Rosa and George offered quiet words of encouragement. Chief Williams gave me a nod of approval. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. I had protected my grandparents' legacy, but in doing so, I had lost the last fragments of what family was supposed to be. Judge Henderson must have read my face. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Emily, they would be proud. Not just because you defended their wishes, but because you did it with dignity. You honored them. And in that moment, surrounded not by blood relatives, but by people who had truly loved my grandparents, I understood. I hadn't lost a family. I had found the one I was always meant to have. When the last of their cars disappeared down the long driveway, the house finally exhaled. The silence that followed was not empty, it was cleansing. Dorothy moved quickly, setting out more coffee and warm pastries as if to seal the moment, to remind me that life still had flavor, even after bitterness. Rosa leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notebook, a small smile tugging at her lips. George closed his binder with a satisfying thud, as though to say case closed. But me, I stood in the middle of the room, my body heavy with exhaustion, my chest hollow. I had done it. I had defended my grandparents' legacy. Yet victory felt strangely incomplete. Protecting their wishes had meant burning the last bridges with the people who shared my blood. My family had left, not with reconciliation, but with hatred in their eyes. Judge Henderson, sensing my conflict, spoke gently. Emily, you did not lose family today. You simply revealed the truth that blood alone does not make family. Loyalty, respect, and love do, and those things you already have in abundance here. His words landed with unexpected force. Around me sat people who had chosen to be here, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. Dorothy, who had kept their home alive for decades. Rosa, who had built their company side by side with them. George, who had safeguarded their finances with honesty. Carlos, who had watched over their property like it was his own, and the judge himself, who had carried their trust into this very day. I wasn't alone, not anymore. Over the next weeks, my life shifted in ways I could barely process. Mr. Goldstein guided me through legal matters, while Rosa helped me step carefully into my role as heir to Alexander Logistics. George walked me through financial strategies, ensuring I understood not just what I had, but how to protect it. Slowly, the terrifying weight of responsibility began to transform into something else purpose. I returned to teaching at Sunshine Elementary, surprising many who thought I would abandon my classroom now that I was wealthy. But the truth was, those children grounded me. They reminded me daily why my grandparents had admired my choice to live with purpose rather than profit. With part of the inheritance, I funded new books, art supplies, and warm coats for my students. Small investments, but ones that made enormous differences. At the same time, I established the Henry and Margaret Carter Foundation for Education, dedicating $10 million to scholarships and school programs. Our first event awarded full college funding to 20 local seniors, young men and women, who reminded me of myself, brimming with potential, but held back by money. As each student crossed the stage, I felt my grandparents' presence as vividly as if they stood beside me. My family, of course, made half-hearted attempts to worm their way back in. My father called when his company struggled, hinting at loans. My mother reached out after her social circle praised the foundation, suddenly eager to serve on the board. Ethan texted when his latest scheme collapsed, begging for startup capital. Aunt Linda suggested holiday reunions at my grandparents' house, conveniently large enough to host her friends. But I remembered the terms I had set: respect their wishes, stop contesting, or stay away. None of them could meet those terms, and so I closed those doors firmly. Instead, I built new traditions. Sunday dinners continued, hosted now in the very dining room where my grandparents once presided. Rosa Carlos and his family, Dorothy, the judge George, and others from their circle filled the table. We laughed, we argued playfully, we supported one another. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it was the family I had chosen, and the family that had chosen me. 6 months later, I visited my grandparents' graves for the first time since the funeral. I brought fresh flowers, sat on the small bench nearby, and whispered, "I'm trying my best to honor what you built." I told them about the scholarships, the foundation, the way their employees still spoke of them with reverence. A breeze rustled the trees' golden leaves spiraling down, and I swear in that moment I felt their approval. I left the cemetery with tears in my eyes, but they were not the tears of loss. They were of gratitude, because the inheritance had never been just about money. It had been about values, about using resources to create something meaningful, about seeing clearly who loved me for me and who only saw me as a bank. And though the wealth had revealed the worst in my blood relatives, it had also revealed the best in others. In the end, I had not just inherited $26 million. I had inherited a legacy of dignity, resilience, and love. And if this story resonates with you, let me leave you with: this family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by the people who stand with you when the storm comes. So if you've ever had to choose between protecting your values and pleasing others, remember you are stronger than you think. And if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in the darkest places, make sure you stay with me. Another story even more unbelievable is waiting for you next. In the months that followed, life settled into a rhythm I never thought possible. The chaos of courtroom threats and family ultimatums faded, replaced by mornings filled with children's laughter in my classroom, and evenings surrounded by people who truly cared for me. The house that once felt unbearably empty began to breathe again. With Carlos tending the gardens, Dorothy keeping traditions alive in the kitchen, and Rosa hosting strategy sessions in the dining room, it transformed from a mausoleum of memories into a living, thriving home. On Sundays, I set the long dining table just as my grandparents once did. Friends gathered, stories were shared, and the room rang with laughter. In those moments, I realized I had not lost family, I had simply redefined it. The people around me weren't bound to me by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and love. And that bond was stronger than any inheritance. The foundation flourished. Scholarships funded dreams that once seemed impossible. Schools received supplies, children gained opportunities, and communities felt hope where it had been missing. Every time I handed a student a coat in winter or placed a new book in their hands, I felt my grandparents' presence. Their philosophy money is a tool, not a measure of worth, guided me daily. Looking back, I understood that the inheritance wasn't really about $26 million. It was about clarity. It stripped away illusions, showing me who valued me and who valued only wealth. Painful as it was, it gave me freedom, the freedom to walk away from manipulation and step fully into the life my grandparents believed I could build. And so I live each day with one promise: to honor their legacy, not by clinging to wealth, but by multiplying its impact. Their love remains my compass, pointing me toward a life of purpose, compassion, and strength.